Dear speakers, alumni and students, I wish to welcome you to this conference on behalf of the Sciences Po Energy Association and the Sciences Po Alumni Group for Energy Infrastructure and Mobility, and sincerely thank you on attending this event. We have gathered this evening to discuss one crucial theme that has been dominating European affairs since the beginning of this year: the impact of the gas crisis caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the European energy transition. As never before since the end of the Second World War, peace and national self-determination are being threatened in Europe. By invading an independent member of the United Nations, Russia has directly challenged the post-war international order built on the values of non-aggression and sovereignty, echoing a return to the archaic system of the balance of power in realpolitik, bitter remnants of the European past. The European energy system is one of the central arenas of this conflict. Defined by decades of interdependence, can be seen through the gas pipelines running across the vast plains of Central and Eastern Europe, and through the giant oil tankers that up until recently transported Russian oil to European ports. This dynamic energy network that has been described as an absolute necessity in sustaining economic life and industrial activity in Europe is now held as one more instrument of coercion in the array of Russian diplomacy. To illustrate the seriousness of contemporary developments, we may look back to the days of the Cold War. Even during these times of profound tensions between the USSR and the West, Soviet gas exports were expanding across the Iron Curtain and into Western Europe. As we witness the coming of winter and the intensification of the military campaign on the front line, the most important question remains: will Russia hesitate to fully utilize its gas weapon in a desperate attempt to enhance its position vis-à-vis the European allies of Ukraine, as its prospects of succumbing the Ukrainian army are becoming ever more futile on the terrain? If this be the case, will the European countries be able to rally under a single cause and refuse to yield to the Russian threat? Standing at the crossroads of energy geopolitics, Europe can choose multiple paths, none of which would exclude severe challenges and constraints. Therefore, will the European pivot towards diversification and new suppliers be sufficient in addressing the continent's thirst for energy, and will the emerging ties with new suppliers from North America, the Gulf, or Central Asia signal a return to those tedious bonds of interdependence which defined our relations with Russia? If that be the case, should the way forward in the pursuit of energy security and independence be led by the sole reliance on Europe's own resources and capacities, paving the way for the return of nuclear energy and the grand mobilization for the cause of the transition to renewable energy sources? Finally, as the dangers of economic and social unrest loom over the continent, may the former ambitions be pushed away for the sake of a settlement with Russia and the new compromise upon which the European energy system would be built upon. To better understand all of these difficult questions, we are here tonight with our speakers, bringing both academic clarity and practical experience to our discussion. Our speakers are Professor GIACOMO LUCIANI, the scientific advisor at the Master in International Energy at Sciences Po Paris, and the co-director of the executive MA program in International Oil and Gas Leadership at the Graduate Institute of Geneva. Ms. ANNE-SOPHIE CORBEAU, Global Research Scholar at the Center for Global Energy Policy at Columbia University and visiting professor at Sciences Po, and Mr. GERGELY MOLNÁR, MA International Energy Alumni and gas analyst at the International Energy Agency here in Paris. Once again, I would like to thank our speakers on accepting to participate at this conference on behalf of the Sciences Po Energy Association, and to thank the Sciences Po Alumni Group for Energy Infrastructure and Mobility, and Mr. Denis Florent for providing the vital guidance in organizing this event. We believe that this evening will represent an important opportunity to tackle a vital topic that is yet to define the coming times. Finally, we hope that this event will set a good practice for the future cooperation between the Sciences Po Energy Association and the Sciences Po Alumni Group for Energy Infrastructure and Mobility. Our event will commence with the discussion with the speakers, followed by a Q&A session. But before continuing, I would like to pass the word to Ms. Audrey Quinn, who will address the participants on behalf of the Sciences Po Alumni Group for Energy Infrastructure and Mobility. Thank you.
Merci, Georges. Merci beaucoup. Un tout petit mot pour vous dire au nom des alumni et du président de votre groupe, Denis Florent, malheureusement, vous ne pouvez pas être parmi nous ce soir, et qui est, je dois, connecté en ligne. Nous remercions vivement les intervenants qui nous font l'honneur d'être avec nous ce soir pour nous partager leur vision de la scène énergétique européenne l'heure actuelle, à l'heure de grands bouleversements. Et nous sommes extrêmement heureux de cette nouvelle occasion de collaborer avec SIA et avec le professeur Luciani. Donc, merci à tous et merci à l'école de nous accueillir dans cette salle.
Thank you, Audrey. I would now invite our speakers to present their introductory speeches on the contemporary context. So I would invite Mr. GERGELY MOLNÁR to commence with his presentation.
Can you pass me the,
Sorry.
can you pass me the laptop?
Of course.
Switch. Lots of cables. I'm no longer projecting. Maybe because no.
No.
Supposed to be your reality on school is mastering the scripts.
Still learning.
Can you just go back to where we were before?
And that's good because now we have time to
To accommodate.
other what?
No.
I think there is more light over there, so it's no longer projecting.
No.
So it's like the system has been switched off. We need to restart.
Oh, okay, it's now. It broke.
I think we need to restart probably.
Okay.
Okay, so you're good now.
But now I'm not good here.
La connectivité, des fois, il faut regarder.
No, la connect.
No.
Okay, we are.
Moi, j'appelle ça que c'est la vitesse. parce qu'on
Sorry,
peut-
just your.
We just need to reopen the presentation.
Don't put it on the full screen.
Yeah, you think that
Okay,
that's
so can you?
But you still
But
need to-
yeah, we don't see it.
add, it's like my husband's computer.
Oh, yeah.
Voilà.
ANNE-SOPHIE
Yes.
saving the day. Yeah, maybe we
Yeah.
should.
The presentation is okay.
Like when the bear attacks you, just pretend you are dead. No, we must do it here.
No, we need to move the cursor.
Okay, no, we are
It's fine.
okay.
Yes, okay.
But we need to.
Can we make it full screen? Oh, we can't. Okay, then maybe.
Okay.
It's fine. It's fine.
Try. Well, okay.
Okay, okay, we are good.
Sorry, they do not hear. We are on Zoom. Professor Luciani, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, yes, very good.
He can hear us. Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So, sorry for this little delay. We are having some.
Are you
technical-
trying to share screen?
No, no. That would be. Yeah, but. Just let's relaunch the PowerPoint. No. No, it's just to. No. Zoom is on. Is working fine. Just. Okay.
Okay.
Just a second. But.
So if I go here, maybe stratégique, and we click here. Yes. Stratégique. That probably should work. It
You
works.
can see us. Okay. Sorry for this delay. So we will continue with Mr. Molnár's presentation.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Gergely Molnár. I'm a gas master for the International Energy Agency. Many thanks for Sciences Po Energy Association for inviting the IEA to this discussion, and also personally for me it's a great pleasure to be back this evening to my alma mater. We will start this discussion with just a couple of numbers to put things into perspective. Why do we speak about natural gas? Because it is approximately 1/4 of the European Union's primary energy demand. The consumption of natural gas is concentrated in residential and commercial sector and in the power sector. These three together account for approximately 2/3 of European gas consumption. And in the last 5 years, Russia alone accounted for about 40% of the EU's natural gas demand. So this slide shows us the price roller coaster in which we have been living for the last 1 year now. It shows that prices started to gradually increase already in the first half of 2021, but this increase has been in a way organic, it has been natural, it has been driven by tightening supply-demand fundamentals. The demand has been growing more rapidly than many of us expected. The rebound from COVID has been stronger. At the same time, on the supply side, we had a number of unplanned outages, which were tightening the picture. But then when we are looking at August, September last year, we see this increase, which has been very much driven by Russia's and Gazprom's particular behavior of reducing its supplies to the European market ahead of the winter season, and despite of having spare production and transport capacity. At the time, we call this artificial scarcity. And then, of course, we had this spike post-invasion volatility in March of this year. Then prices started to come down a bit in the summer, but not for too long, because then on mid-June, Gazprom started to gradually reduce its supplies via the Nord Stream pipeline system. And here we see that prices spiked to historic records in August. And I like to call this period, which is of course still lasting, as structural uncertainty, because the European market for decades has been determined by the presence of long-term supply contracts, Russian long-term supply contracts. Those are not valid anymore. So this means that our exposure to the spot market has increased quite significantly. And of course, this increasingly means more uncertainty, more price volatility. And when we speak about price volatility, it means prices can go as high as 30, 50 euro per megawatt hours, but they can go also negative, as they have been 2 days ago in the TTF next hour contract. Now, this slide is just to illustrate the scope of the issue. Russian piped gas supplies to OECD Europe declined by approximately 40% year-on-year in the first 9 months of this year. This equates to approximately 55 BCM. That's a major supply shock. And we see that all the alternative suppliers have been trying to increase their deliveries to the European market. Algeria, Norway, Azerbaijan via the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, but it has been really LNG which was doing sort of the heavy lifting. Our LNG imports increased by over 60%, or approximately 50 BCM, and this has been largely enabled by the flexible US LNG volumes. Now, this obviously had an impact. If I move to the next slide, I cannot move to the next slide, but if we move, thank you so much, Georgia. So if we move to the next slide, we see that this huge pull from the European Union and from Europe had a consequence to the entire global gas market and led to a reconfiguration of global energy flows. It shows this slide that there had been some supply growth coming from the US, from some other suppliers, but in order to satisfy this thirst for LNG from Europe, there had been also a need for the redirection of flows primarily away from Asia. And Asia has been, of course, considered for long as the engine for LNG trade growth. When we are looking at the first 9 months of this year, we see that Asian LNG imports declined by over 7%. And this has been primarily because of China reducing its LNG imports by over 20% year-on-year. And when we are looking at China, what we see is that they are not present anymore on the spot market. They are just relying on their long-term contracts, but they are keeping themselves away from the spot market. So one other consequence of these very high gas prices was on demand. 2021 was a very strong year for natural gas. Demand increased by over 180 BCM. This was the third largest increase in the history of gas. When we are looking at 2022, the picture is very different. In our latest forecast, we foresee a decline of 0.8% for natural gas consumption. And this is largely due to stagnating demand in the Asia-Pacific region, some decline in Eurasia because of the lower economic activity in Russia, and Europe, for which we do forecast the largest decline in history for natural gas, a decline of around 9%, which do translate into about 54 BCM, but when we are looking at now the latest October figures, this just confirms that we will really see this year an historic decline in European gas consumption. Now, winter ahead, finally, one good news is that we have been very able to refill our storages. They are standing at the moment at 94% of their working capacity. We are around 5 BCM above the 5-year average. And maybe to note that, of course, this has been partly due to the targets which had been set by the European Union, by the national governments, but to a very great extent, the fact that we are in such good position in terms of storage field levels is due to the market forces which have been at play. TTF prices have been instrumental in attracting record levels of LNG inflow, and they were also driving the painful demand destruction in Europe. But these factors, they were needed to have the storages at an adequate level. So we are a security-driven organization, so we do like to do some sensitivity analysis and to stress a bit the system to see how things can play out if you know, not everything is so rosy. So we did some sensitivity analysis for this heating season. We developed different scenarios in terms of LNG availability, in terms of demand projections. And basically the key takeaway from here is that if Europe does not reduce its demand significantly during this heating season, we might end up with storages below 30% at the end of February 2023. And this might be an issue. So this sort of thermometer is showing the consequences of the different storage field levels in the case of a cold spell occurring at the end of February 2023. I think, again, here the takeaway is that we are not 100% safe if our storage levels are below 33% of working capacity. Now, this means that we need to save gas this winter, and this is, for me, that's one of the most important messages from our latest Global Gas Security Review. It shows that European citizens can save about 15 BCM of gas through behavioral changes, such as reducing the thermostat by 1 degree, adjusting the boiler temperatures, and be careful on how we consume electricity. But of course, weather is helping us at the moment. Okay, so one more comment on that. Why do we need to save gas? It's 2 reasons. One is because we need to keep the storage levels above 33 in order to have a safe and secure winter. And the second, the higher the storage levels are at the end of the heating season, the easier will be the 2023 market in terms of the supply-demand balance. And this chart gives us a bit of an idea about the future. It shows the LNG liquefaction capacity additions in the coming years. And I would like to bring to your attention the year of 2023, which will be one of the poorest years in terms of liquefaction capacity additions. In our forecast, we foresee just 20 BCM of additional LNG supply coming to the market. This is one of the lowest we have seen in recent years. Now, this is combined by the outlook for Russian gas, in which we foresee, in the best case, a decline of 35 BCM arriving to the European market. So LNG supply alone will not be able to offset the decline in Russian pipeline deliveries into the European Union. And this paints the picture of an increasingly tight market for 2023. And in this context, again, reducing gas demand will be critical to balance the market. So I have two more slides about the future. This one is our medium-term outlook. It shows that gas demand growth will slow down in the medium term to 0.8% per year. It will be largely concentrated in the Asia-Pacific region and in the gas-rich Middle East, and it will be largely driven by industry. Now, what is maybe more important is the words of our executive director, Dr. Fatih Birol, today. So today is a very special day at the International Energy Agency. We released our flagship report, the World Energy Outlook 2022 edition. And when it has been launched this morning, Dr. Fatih Birol said that we are approaching to the end of golden age of gas. So a bit of context for this sentence. On the 6th of June 2011, we released our special report, The Golden Age of Gas. And that was a major report because we were foreseeing a very strong growth in natural gas demand. We have been saying that between 2010 and 2020, gas demand will increase by 700 BCM. And when we are looking back at those numbers, we were exactly right. This decade, these 10 years, this was a golden age, a golden decade for natural gas. Now, when we are looking at both the medium term and the long term, in all our scenarios, on the steps, which is including the current market trends and the stated energy policies of the countries, the APS, which is the announced policies scenarios, and the NZE, net zero by 2050 scenario. So in all the scenarios, we see that the outlook for natural gas is rather mere. The most optimistic for natural gas is the STEPS scenario, and here we foresee that natural gas demand will grow by 0.4% per year between 2021 and 2030. This compares with a growth of 2.2% in the last decade. So that's a very significant acceleration. And then in 2030, it will peak and will be remaining flat until 2050. When we are looking at the APS, we see that gas demand in 2030 will be about 10% lower than in 2021. And when we are looking at NZE, we foresee gas demand to decline by almost 40% by 2030. So I will be more than happy to discuss those issues in more detail during the Q&A session. And now I would like to give back the floor to George and to Anne-Sophie. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Gergely, on this detailed analysis. We can continue our discussion with the presentation from Professor Anne-Sophie Corbeau. So I will pass the word to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I don't have any slides, so no technical disaster in sight. It's actually very funny that Geneva has presented the golden age of gas, because I was one of the co-authors of that report. So we got it about right in terms of the global numbers. Don't look too much in terms of the regional numbers.
Anne-Sophie, can you get closer to the mic?
Ah, yes, I thought that would
Do
be
you
a
want to
problem like that.
switch?
Yes, that's probably a good idea. So that I can be heard.
Yes, excellent.
I am very happy, of course, to be here today. I can see a couple of my students because I'm teaching energy security of all things here at Sciences Po. It's a very topical thing for anybody who might be interested. My first point is that we are not facing only a gas crisis. We are facing an energy crisis. Don't forget that Russia is not only a large gas exporter, it was also a large oil and refined products exporter. We may feel a little bit of that when the embargo starts in 1st December on oil and then on refined products in February. And it's also a large coal exporter, and we put in place an embargo in August. But the point is that, in particular in Europe, we are currently facing a gas crisis, as I mean, it's now pretty clear why we are facing a gas crisis. We are also facing a power crisis. And this is it's not something that you have realized, or maybe actually you know because you are in France. But in the European Union, the nuclear generation has dropped by about 16% over the first 9 months, mostly because of what is happening in France in terms of nuclear generation, the corrosion issues, the maintenance issue, but also because of the decommissioning of a few power plants in Germany. But the worst in percentage terms is actually coming from hydro, minus 25%. I think we all know why. It's climate change. Now, how are we replacing all that electricity? Well, wind and solar, of course, but they are doing about half of the job. And in order to basically compensate the other half, we need to bring back coal, which I guess everybody is aware of. We brought back coal pretty much everywhere we could. At some point in June, I saw the same day announcements of coal coming back in Germany, in Austria, in Netherlands. That was a pretty bad day. But we are also consuming more gas in power generation. Year on year, our gas consumption in the power generation sector has increased. So this is making our gas reduction target even more complicated, because gas is a very important fuel in the power generation sector. It's about 20% of the total mix. So we need to reduce, as you have seen in the graphics before, we need to reduce our gas demand in all the sectors. In the residential, commercial, and the behavior is particularly important. In industry, I will come back to that, but also in the power generation sector. So it will be particularly important to keep our nuclear power plants, if we can. There is already one which is gone in Belgium. There are probably 3 which are going to be gone at some point in Germany next year. And we need to really accelerate the buildup of renewable energy. This is absolutely essential. So that's my first point. My second point is that Russia is at war with the collective West. And I think this is very important to understand that from a geopolitical point of view, but also to understand how they are thinking, or how Mr. Putin is thinking in terms of strategy. He basically wants to impose maximum damage on us. So maximum damage that we can feel in our everyday life, with a higher prices for food, potentially with an upcoming food crisis at a world scale, but also because energy prices are at record high. And we are spending literally hundreds of billions in Europe to cover that. The Bruegel Institute, as I said, that it has cost us about something like, it's costing us with all the measures in place about 500 billion. So to some extent you can think, well, that's 500 billion that we are not going to get to basically advance a lot more the transitions, energy transition. But what worries me the most is something that we saw a little bit in these graphics. This is what is happening in our industrial sector. And that is really very concerning. I know, in the Brussels circles, etc., we have, among other things, the gas coordination group, and we have little tables and with numbers. So when a country has achieved a very significant decline in terms of gas consumption, they are extremely happy, the politicians. I've seen, you probably remember, we were together that day. We have seen, German politicians very happy about the big decline in industrial gas demand.
from pure industrial production. I am not so happy because yes, destruction. So what we are facing now is a potential delocalization of our industry leaving Europe. And this is a concern because the implications would be to have lower industrial activity in Europe, therefore lower employment, therefore lower economic growth. And don't think that anybody is going to cry over the fate of Europe. Putin, of course, more than happy. China as well, when they have sorted out their zero COVID policy. In the Middle East, probably very happy as well. You know, they can produce more, anything which is energy intensive. And in the United States, I can tell you that they will be very happy as well. Actually, I had a talk with some US investors a while ago. And when we were talking about, you know, how the US could help Europe, somebody mentioned, okay, we cannot export more LNG right now, but surely we can export more products made with US natural gas. And I replied, oh yes, that's a very good idea. I am not quite sure how this is going to help our industrial sector, because hey, it won't. Now, I'm sure that if you are talking about that in Brussels, they are going to tell you, yes, but wait a minute. We have hydrogen. Hydrogen is going to save us, all of us. Yes, maybe eventually hydrogen, I mean, I am doing hydrogen as well, and I do believe in hydrogen, but as it's very painful to see, we have 3 years ahead of us that are going to be very difficult, because this is precisely this period up until the LNG supply grows again. This is this period which is going to be very tight. So hydrogen, next 3 years, I don't think so. So there is no white knight inside. Maybe eventually. Once I had a discussion with some US counterparts, so we were talking about what kind of policy we could advise the heads of US politicians to take in terms of decarbonization of industry. And I said, you know, I'm quite busy with Europe right now, and my only concern is that I won't have an industrial sector in Europe to decarbonize at all. And when I'm looking at what is happening in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act, I can see that in the United States, there is a very bright future, in particular for hydrogen. I'm not so sure now about Europe. So that's my second point. You know, there are things that we should not really rejoice too much. My third point is about all these objectives of the European Commission. They are great. They are very aspirational, as one of my friends would say. But there is a scale issue, you know. In order to build all these gigawatts of wind and solar, all these billion cubic meters of additional biomethane that we need, etc., the electrolyzers to build hydrogen, well, we need to basically multiply by 3 every single year between now and 2030, the capacity of wind and solar that we are going to add compared to what we were adding before. But that's not going to be easy. And when I talk to people, I realize that, you know, we might not only have a problem maybe with some critical materials, but we might also have a problem because we need to basically deploy this fast enough. And you know that, you know, there are meeting issues, even though the European Commission has got that, they realize that they're trying to basically streamline the processes, but it's not only building the capacity, which is important. You also need the transmission lines, because it's all very good to have wind farm. If it's not connected, it's not going to be very useful. And do not underestimate the NIMBY problem. Do not. I have a very good friend. She lives in La Baule, just in front of the first offshore wind plant in France. And I mean, honestly, I stayed 5 days in La Baule, and I was like, where are all these wind farms that everybody is talking about? I couldn't see them. Finally, I could finally see them. They are that small. And she was like, no, can you see them? And she's, you know, a very reasonable person. So I'm thinking if a very reasonable person is against a wind farm that you can hardly see from far away, it's not going to be easy. Finally, I mean, behavioral changes are absolutely crucial. You know, the net zero scenario that Gergely was mentioning, I mean, there is also a lot of the change in our behavior, and that's absolutely critical. So to come back on one of the messages that the IEA has, and on which I totally agree, we need to change. We need also to reduce the thermostat. We need to reduce our energy consumption. So you probably see a lot of advice on TV. They are absolutely important because we need to survive this winter. And I know right now it seems like, oh yes, the prices are falling. Oh, by the way, they are still at 100 euro per megawatt hour, which is $30 per MMBTU, which is about $180 per barrel equivalent. So not that low. We are lucky, but we still need to save energy. So don't think that the work is done just because we have 2 weeks of relatively mild or relatively hot weather. It is absolutely crucial for everybody to play their parts and to reduce their energy consumption. Because next year, in 2023, when we are out of the winter, we will need to refill again the storage, maybe without Russian gas at all. And the same thing in the winter 23-24, and the same thing in 24-25. So, you know, when we are out of next winter, we are not done yet. That's it.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Anne-Sophie, on this insightful analysis. Sorry for the little inconvenience. We will pass now to Professor Luciani, giving the word to him.
Thank you, George. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to see, even if remotely, both Anne-Sophie and Gergely. Let me say that indeed today is the day that the World Energy Outlook has been published, and this is an occasion for me to say that we are going to present, as every year, the World Energy Outlook at Sciences Po on the 9th of November from 5:30 to 7 p.m. And so I hope you will see an invitation, because we will send it out also to all alumni. And I hope to see you numerous there. Coming now to our topic today. I think the importance of reducing gas consumption has been very well stressed by Gergely and also Anne-Sophie. And I think that's the key point that we need to consider. I see the situation as being a bit paradoxical, because it is evident that our governments have been extremely reluctant to put in place measures that are designed to reduce consumption. They have mostly been preoccupied with looking at solutions that might cushion the consumer from the increase in prices. So either subsidies of various forms or ideas of imposing a ceiling on a cap on gas prices, but very little attention has gone into measures to encourage and support reduction in consumption. Nevertheless, consumption is being reduced, and that is a confirmation of something that I have, so to speak, witnessed in several occasions in the past, and that is that we always assume that demand and supply are more rigid than they in fact are. Demand and supply are rigid relative to smaller movement in prices, but when very significant movements in prices occur, there is a reaction. There is a reaction which might not be immediate, but somewhat delayed. Consumers, users need some time to find out what is their options, what are their options, what is the best course of action for them, but they do act. And so we see, I believe today, a significant reaction both from residential and commercial consumer, and especially from industry, for which in many cases the increase in the price of gas is a matter of life and death. So on one hand, they claim for subsidies, and governments are being pulled in that direction by the statements from industry. But at the same time, they are also implementing measures to actually decrease demand. In some cases, the measures are not, so to speak, the best that we might hope for, in the sense that they entail closing down lines of production, notably in certain areas, notably, for example, in petrochemicals, the whole value chain of ammonia and fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers is endangered, but it is reacting. And is it bad that it should be endangered, or that a question mark should be raised on the future of this industry? I think that in the end, we have to accept and come to the conclusion that, relatively speaking, Europe will be, and has always been, in fact, a high energy cost area relatively to the rest of the world, and that will necessarily encourage the displacement of industrial activities towards other parts of the world. If we think in terms of a future that is dominated by renewables, those are very much dependent on meteorological or physical conditions in different regions of the world, and Europe is not terribly favored in this respect. So that is one long-term, really long-term structural element that needs to be taken into account. With respect to supply, I also believe that there will be adjustments of a way, in a way that sometimes may not be easily predictable. But I think in the end, we will see greater supply coming to the fore, as we have seen, because I don't think we expected 6 months ago that we would be able to replenish the storage, gas in storage as we have, and would have been able to attract so much LNG as we have attracted. So sometimes we need to have faith in the market, because the market works, traders work, and the profit motive is very powerful, and people come up with ideas that we might not expect. So that's one consideration. Having said that, it is clear that we have ahead of us another perhaps 3 years of difficulty up to 2025. But I would expect that the difficulty will be decreasing, not increasing, including for 2023. Now, the other very interesting question mark is about Russia, because on the one hand, I am personally convinced that there is no going back on the decision to drastically reduce the dependence on Russian gas. We may discuss whether it is taking it to zero or taking it to a level which is not politically relevant anyhow. That is an open question. But the other open question is about the future of Russia. Can we envisage that Russia will progressively turn into a second North Korea, a country that is isolated economically and politically in international context, or has only the possibility of relying on China? Can we picture Russia being politically stable in a context in which there is no remaining economic intercourse with the rest of Europe or the United States? I think that's it's a difficult scenario to envisage. So at the moment, of course, you look at the news, and there is not much hope for a change of tack. But we cannot extrapolate the current situation into the future indefinitely, because I think it's not reasonable to do so. There are obviously forces within Russian society that are capable of reacting, that know better. And, this is not a country that is easily enslaved in the same way as North Korea has been, okay? So I think we have to keep a door open to the possibility that sometimes, I really don't know when, but at some point in time, the picture may change again, and then what happens? That is very interesting, because one might say, well, what is done, and we are not going to change our position in any way. But that too seems a bit extreme, and I think there might be other considerations coming to the fore. The simple size of the outflow of people from Russia, well-trained, educated professional from Russia that has followed the announcement of mobilization is such, and I think it's probably more important than all the sanctions, is such that one cannot easily project the situation to continue without some change. So that is what we need to look at, and hopefully our governments will start thinking in terms that are more strategic and not focusing only on the price and looking for strange mechanisms to impose a cap on prices, which I think is something difficult to achieve. It's more likely that prices will progressively, slowly, but progressively decrease to a level which would, in any case, be sufficient to stimulate additional investment in LNG capacity elsewhere in the world. I think that will happen. I think that preoccupations about assets becoming stranded are exaggerated. And in any case, the important thing when you launch a project is the cash flow at the beginning of the project. What happens after year 10, after year 15 in the life of a project is much less important than what happens in years 1 to 5. That's what makes or breaks a project. So these are my considerations. Thank you for your patience. And I'm sorry that I cannot join you physically, but it's more important than Gergely and Anne-Sophie are there.
Thank you very much, Professor, on your analysis. And we can now proceed with our discussion, which will be a little bit narrow due to our time constraints. So from my side, I would like to continue on your insights on the Russian case and the scenarios which Russia can face now in order to surpass its difficulties. You mentioned the isolation of Russia as one of the potential scenarios which can occur, but the Russian cooperation with China and the prospects of the expansion of Russian trade with China, particularly in terms of additional gas pipelines, and on the other hand with India in the case of oil exports, has been one of the central topics of and one of the central as to say alternatives that the Russian government has been focusing on. So I would like to invite our speakers to say a word or two on this particular issue. How can Russia surpass this? And does it have the capabilities to compensate for the loss of the European markets with potential new markets in Asia and the expansion of the West markets of India and China, which can be expected definitely for the forthcoming period?
Okay, maybe I can start with a few words. So in terms of natural gas, Russia exports about 140 billion cubic meters to the European Union. So this is what is at stake. This gas is mostly produced just below the Yamal Peninsula, so the traditional or historical gas fields like Orangol, Medvezier, etc. It's going to be difficult and take a lot of time to basically change the whole infrastructure in order to basically send back to China. You need to build new pipelines across Russia. And the only one which is foreseen right now, which has not been agreed upon, is the power of Siberia 2, which will be 55 BCM. So you see 140 on one side, 55 on the other side. The second question is about LNG. So right now, Russia is building one LNG plant, which is called Arctic LNG 2. There are question marks on whether this plant is going to be affected about sanctions. And of course, Russia had a lot of ambitions in terms of future LNG exports. The big question mark is to what extent now can they really build up these LNG export plants without Western technology. By the way, we are happily continuing to import in Europe Russian LNG. Nobody wants to talk about that. I think we are all very happy to do that. We do not want to sanction the Russian LNG. We need it because our global LNG balance is relatively tight. Now, let me add a word on, the geopolitical isolation of Russia. A few weeks ago, I think I was in the US, and the US politicians were not happy about the decision of OPEC Plus, and about the reduction of exports, because it seems that Saudi Arabia has kind of chosen its camp and is kind of siding with Russia. So I think you have to understand again, Russia is at war with the collective West. So they are unfriendly countries. There are a lot of friendly countries. And there are a lot of friendly countries which actually think that the responsible for all the conflict is not Russia, which is trying to defend itself. It's NATO, and in particular, the United States. So we may be thinking like Europeans, but in many regions and countries in the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, they think differently.
Thank you. Would someone add?
I can add, but maybe Professor Luciani first.
Professor.
Well, Anne-Sophie has mentioned the rift between Saudi Arabia and Washington. I think that's another very significant change that is going to develop for the oil market in this case. What you say, Anne-Sophie, is correct. There may be people outside of Europe that do not quite understand the reaction of the European countries and of the United States. But the point is that this is the reaction. People in Europe, our governments, our public opinion, our media, and in the United States equally, view this as a fight between democracies and autocracies. And this is the reason why, in many ways, China is also involved in this shift of opinions. Okay, until recently, we were happily courting China and seeking to increase economic interaction with China. Now this has already changed, and there is major preoccupation for all sorts of dependencies from China. The discussion about the Hamburg harbor is a manifestation of this, okay, of this shift of opinion. And I think, therefore, that this is the reality. This is viewed and is lived as a fight in between democracies and autocracies. And Saudi Arabia happens to be an autocracy. I think there is very little appreciation for the leadership of Saudi Arabia, including in the United States. There has been, for a time under Trump, a sort of cynical attitude to exploit the situation and sort of get as much money out of Saudi Arabia as possible. But this is not the same thing as having an appreciation of your ally. I don't think that anyone in either Europe or the United States views the Saudi leadership today as being a reliable partner. It may not go to the extreme of considering it a rogue state like a pariah, like Biden said. But you know, a reliable partner has different characteristics, I would say. So what we are seeing now is, on the part of the United States, a very interesting redefinition of the rules for the use of the strategic petroleum reserve. And I think the new rules may well signify a shift in the functioning of the international oil market with active intervention on the part of the United States to prevent excessive changes in prices. It's a different discussion, however. I don't want to get into it now.
Thank you, Professor.
So I guess maybe to add what Professor Luciani and Sophie said, our analysis indicates that for Russia it would take about a decade to replace the 155 BCM it supplied to the European Union in 2021, and of course it includes some optimistic assumptions from the perspective of Russia, namely building the Arctic 92. Where there is one train which is 98% ready, and this one we do forecast that it will come online, but then there is two trains which are, the second train is half ready, and the third one they did not start to build up, and it is possible that without Western technology it will be quite challenging to finish those. And the big question mark is the power of Siberia 2, to which Anne-Sophie alluded to. It is a 50 BCM per year pipeline which would connect the West Siberian fields via Mongolia to China. that pipeline has been on paper for years, probably for over a decade. And recently, both Putin and Gazprom's senior management has been very vocal on the fast progression about the negotiations. I think Putin has gone so far saying that the pricing mechanism has been agreed, which is the most crucial element in a long-term supply contract. This all sounds good, but none of those elements have been mentioned in China, including Chinese media or by Chinese leadership. So this raises some question marks on how far those talks are progressing. But even if you reach this agreement, it takes 5, 6, maybe more years to build up such a huge pipeline system. It is several thousand kilometers land, and it goes through a quite challenging terrain. So it is, yeah. I mean, altogether, that's our estimate. That in best case for Russia, it would take a decade to replace the volumes it supplied once to the EU, and very importantly, the rule of the games will be quite different, because when we are looking back at the Russian-European relationship in gas, Russia was in a position to dictate a lot of dynamics in the European market. That's not going to happen with China. It's very unlikely. So the power positions are quite different. And when we are looking at what is the price of the Russian gas supplied to China, it is a fraction of the price level they have been receiving from the EU. So what it is.
Thank you, Gergely, in helping us understand the Russian alternatives. But when we focus now on Europe and the alternatives that it can follow and the roads it can decide to go, I think that one of the most interesting topics and one of the most controversial ones is regarding the renewal of the nuclear energy capabilities in European countries, particularly in a country such as Germany. So where do our speakers see the scenario with nuclear energy in the future and in relation to this particular crisis?
I have been praying for months that finally the minister in Germany is going to see light and basically stop this, in my opinion, relatively ridiculous idea of decommissioning nuclear power plants. I don't understand why this is so complicated to understand that Germany produces still about 30 or so terawatt hours of electricity from its nuclear power plants. It may be only about 1% of total EU generation, but when we are asking everybody to basically reduce their energy consumption, decided to decommission 3 nuclear power plants, which work very well. I was an intern in one of them 20 years ago. Doesn't make any sense to me. You can blame the French as much as you want for the current problems that we are facing. This is unfortunately outside of our control. Keeping nuclear power plants in Germany is. However, you need to keep the workforce, because this is not something where, well, you and I can just say, hey, I want to work in a nuclear power plant. Maybe not. You need also to order the fuel rods, and you need also to have all the necessary paperwork, etc., which with a little bit of goodwill can be arranged. But the fuel rods and the workforce are absolutely critical. Now, last week I was at a conference where there was a Greenpeace speaker who seems to be very close to the minister, and after April 2023, no more nuclear power plants in Germany. Now, I think in other countries in Europe, they are starting to reconsider not so much, I mean, the decommissioning that was in Belgium for 2 of the nuclear power plants, but in general, I think there is a rethinking. However, when you look at Olkiluoto in Finland and Flamanville in France, it's going to take time, okay? It's going to take a lot of time. We hope that we can do better with the next ones, but it's a decade minimum.
Definitely. Yeah.
My favorite subject.
Hot topic, yes. Professor, would you like to extend on this topic?
I would like to say that we need to wait for April, and we see what happens in April.
Yeah.
I
mean, Giacomo, in April, it's
you
going
know,
to be late.
people can change their mind.
But he needs to change mind before, because in April it's going to be too late.
They have.
People order the fuel roads in advance, and you need to tell people that they are going to stay also a little bit in advance. That's my point. But yeah, we shall see.
Gergely.
No, yeah, just one point. There is this discussion about keeping the three remaining nuclear plants in Germany until the 15th of April, and it has been presented a bit like one of the savior measures for Europe for this winter. Just maybe for the sake of context, there is 5 terawatt-hours of fuel remaining in those three power plants. That equates to approximately 1 BCM of gas savings. 1 BCM is 10% of Germany's monthly winter consumption. So just to put things into context, then of course what happens after the 15th of April, that's Germany's sovereign decision.
Well, to continue, maybe let's tackle one additional topic regarding you have mentioned, and you have already, all of you have spoken on the diversification and the acquiring of new supply chains in terms of gas. But when we look to these prospective countries that have been classified optimistically defined as alternative suppliers, Azerbaijan, Egypt, Algeria, United States, and a certain degree, how can we regard these countries, particularly the countries of the Middle East, the Central Asia, and North Africa, the Maghreb, as reliable suppliers for future European consumption in terms of their own regional instabilities, the geopolitical tensions in these regions, and their the characteristics of their political systems, which are certain degrees not that different than the one we have been facing so much challenges with in Russia. So where do you see this new interdependence in the future in the relation to new suppliers?
I want to finish. Let's start.
Professor,
I'm not going to shy away from this. I think the future supplies will come from North America. That includes both the United States and Canada. I think there is considerable potential to increase the supply. You just have to look at the difference in prices. And it's obvious that today, you know, if you have a possibility of investing in an LNG project, it's a very good investment. So it will happen. Then I think we have Qatar. Qatar is investing heavily in expanding its capacity. There are major companies involved in the process. So there is the technical capability, there is the financial capability, there is a market. So we will have more gas from Qatar. And then there is Africa. The advantage of Mozambique, Tanzania, Senegal, Angola, Nigeria is that to a large extent, in some cases, the infrastructure is already there. In other cases, the discoveries are offshore. And so that gives a possibility of relatively enclaving the discoveries if we have a concern about the governance or the security of the regions concerned. I think until now this has not been done because the market was not good enough to stimulate sanctioning those projects, but now it's very attractive.
So maybe 3 points just to complement what Professor said. I think that in the very beginning of the presentation, we were showing these 3 pie charts, and we were showing that Russia's share was 40% into European gas demand. That's not good. That's never good. So there is one country which is heavily reliant on US gas, and the United States is the most developed, one of the most developed democracies. And when they had a cold spell in February 2021, they cut the supplies to Mexico, and Mexico was facing blackouts. It's never good to be overwhelmingly reliant on one country for a strategic good such as natural gas. So I think that keeping this diversity, that will be quite important. And from this sense, it does not matter if we are also importing some gas from countries where, the political regime is not democratic or have a different understanding of what democracy is. The second point is that it will be quite important to build up our own domestic energy production capabilities, and here also to keep the diversity between electrons and molecules. This means, of course, deploying more renewables, but also scaling up low emission gases, biomethane, low emission hydrogen. As mentioned by Anne-Sophie, this will take some time, but this is also important to get a more resilient energy system. So I think that there had been one third point I wanted to mention, but it is escaping me, so maybe it was not that important, or maybe I will remind it later.
I mean, I have a few points. So the first one is that, everybody who is talking to me about Europe is waiting for European companies to sign long-term energy contracts or long-term contracts. And European companies, because they are facing an immediate need and a long-term uncertainty due to decarbonization, they're a little bit reluctant. They're happy to sign 5-10 years deal, but not really the 20 years that countries like Qatar or people who are basically developing new projects in the United States, for example, would like. So there is here, kind of issue of two different positions which are difficult to reconcile for the moment. So that's the first thing. Right now, a lot of LNG contracts are being signed by China, which has signed about 29 new LNG contracts since the beginning of 2021. That's about 50 billion cubic meters. That's quite a lot. And a lot of also of what we call the aggregators, the BP, the Shell, the Chevron, etc. They have signed a lot of these. So, I mean, maybe these companies are going to eventually supply Europe with, again, spot LNG. So we are happy to pay, whatever the spot price is going to be. Now, I mean, looking at, a few exceptions in terms of the signed deals, I have to say that Italy has done a relatively good job, in particular, Eni and the Prime Minister, Mr. Draghi, have done a relatively good job on capitalizing on the good relationship of Eni within the African countries to get more gas, sign a deal with Algeria, with Egypt, try to build a fast LNG plant in Congo, envisage the expansion in Angola, look at potentially building more things in Mozambique. I mean, there is a new plant in Mozambique which is going to arrive anytime soon. So, I mean, they have done a relatively good deal. I think there is a lot of gas in Africa, in particular in Mozambique, the gas is beautiful. I mean, Cabo Delgado, the north of Mozambique, the resources are fantastic, except that, as you may know, the project of Total is currently stopped because of security safety issues over there. So it's not always easy. So I think, when you are looking at the future, in terms of replacement, I mean, first of all, I don't think, looking at the countries and their geopolitical system does matter, because it has not really mattered so much before. So if we start, cherry picking the suppliers, then we are not going to be left with that many people. And by the way, I mean, I have been, because I am European, but working in a US university, I have been hearing a lot of noise in the US about, oh my God, the prices were so high. They are at $10 per MMBTU. This is like incredibly high. We have seen 100, by the way. We need to stop exporting, and we need to reduce our energy exports. Wow. Okay, thank you very much. You are our ally, by the way, like, the guys who have promised that we are going to help us. So, just 2 words about the United States. America first.
Well, for sure. Nevertheless, we have seen in the case of this conflict, one of the very important insights that shows us how the theory of international relations falls when faced with some realities on the terrain. Economic interdependence was propelled and defined as one key pillar for as a deterrent of international conflict. And I believe that in terms of the relations with Russia, you couldn't go anywhere more and higher in terms of economic interdependence. But certain political, and certain historical, and certain cultural factors seem to have fueled these ambitions and made them overlook this economic interdependence. But not to take time from our audience and our participants, I would like to invite Ms. Audrey Quen to commence to present a question in front of the Sciences Po alumni, and at the same time to open our discussion with the participants. So,
thank you, Georgie. Thank you very much for your presentations. You have highlighted the strategic need to accelerate the development of renewables and the associated challenges of the electricity network and connection to very high voltage lines. At the same time, there could be an opportunity to accelerate the production of domestic biogas, biomethane, and to develop its use in industry, heat, and power generation. So my question is the following. From your point of view, in the light of your gas price projections, what could be the competitiveness of biomethane in Europe in the 3 coming years?
Well, I mean, is there a lot of biomethane which is going to arrive in the 3 coming years, which has not been already planned? I mean, of course, right now the prices are very, incentivizing, because I think, the prices for biomethane, and correct me if I'm wrong, are, between 70 and 90 euro per megawatt hour. We are still above that today, I think, even though prices are low. So yes, there is an incentive, but you are not building everything on 3 years of relatively high prices. I mean, it's something that you need to look in the long term. But indeed, the case for biomethane as a domestic supply of gas, I think, is much better than it was before, especially with the European Commission, promoting the development. It has to be, however, sustainable.
Other speakers like to add something on this particular matter?
So, I fully agree with what Anne-Sophie said, and we are looking at the current price dynamics. Yes, current prices are above what is the average range for buying in production costs. But when you are a project developer, you need an outlook for your investment, which is going well beyond the next 2-3 years. And for that purpose, you need some instruments which would help to de-risk your investment. So I think that that in many markets those instruments are being developed, implemented. I think that Denmark is probably the best student in class when it comes to biomethane. At some point this year, the share of biomethane in the Danish rate reached close to 100%. It's amazing, and this also shows the compatibility of biomethane with the existing infrastructure, which is not the case for low emission hydrogen, for instance. But we also have, for instance, the case of Germany, where we have seen a very rapid ramp up of biomethane production up to 1 BCM, and then we see a stagnation because the different incentives have been scaled down or phased out. So this really shows that in order to enable biomethane development, you need support mechanisms, subsidies, contract for differences, whatever, that you need to risk the investment for the project. That's key. And yes, of course, the European Union, the European Commission has targets certified BCM by 2030. That's very ambitious. But maybe also one point to consider here is cutting the red tape. In Europe, the process, the administrative process to authorize the biomethane plant development takes significantly longer than, for instance, in the United States. And when we are looking at the United States, we see that it is actually the leader in terms of incremental biomethane supply in recent years. So there's also maybe some lessons to learn on this administrative process and how to facilitate things. For example, couple of thoughts.
Thank you, Gergely. Professor, if you have anything to add, please.
No, that's fine. I think we can take more questions.
Okay, in that case, we already have some hands here in the room. So yes, we can start with questions. Please. Okay, the lady first.
First of all, sorry, I came in very late. Maybe you already talked about this in the previous intervention. Thank you very much for what I listened. It was very interesting. I have two comments and one question. The first comment is you were talking about, oh my God, what is Russia going to do with all these gases not going to Europe? It's like, who cares? Their revenues come from oil, not from gas. And so for them, it's not a problem. That's why they're actually cutting production in oil so they can have a high price and they can finance their oil. That was my comment. The question is, we're capping the price on gas. What is that signal going to do? What I mean is, if price signal is very important to make consumption diminish, but we are capping it. So what is your take on that? Should we, it's very provocative, but should we cap, should we leave it like that? And how can we reduce consumption if we cap the price?
So there are two things here. There is which price we are capping, because the European Commission is talking about capping wholesale prices, which, I mean, I'm sure Gergely can actually talk about that because you wrote a very good article on that. I'm going to talk about capping the end user price. And on that, I have to say, I don't fully agree on basically capping, for everybody the same thing. I think, there should be targeted measures for the poor of the household, especially because they are very likely to not only face, a problem in terms of revenues and having to choose between heat and heat, but it's quite likely also that they are going to live in a house which has a very low EPC rating. Therefore, they are consuming a higher amount of energy and there is nothing that we can do about it. And on top of that, they have revenues constraints. So for me, what the French government is doing, the plus 15%, I would have said, okay, we do categories. So, the first category is the poorest of the household, they get, whatever. And then for the rest, the higher revenues, I mean, so yeah, you pay market price. Because, you know, you can actually potentially afford it. And it's also likely that you can find a way to basically reduce your consumption. Maybe, you know, you are living in a big house and you basically are using too much space and you can actually stop heating a couple of the rooms, or you can stop heating at 22 degrees and do 19 degrees. I mean, typical example, my parents, 70 years old. I mean, they cannot be convinced to turn down the thermostat from 21 degrees to 19 degrees. They got a relatively good deal in October last year. I told them not to do peg prices, not to do spot prices. They got a fixed price, 6 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, I mean, they are doing the 21 degrees. And I tell them, no, but we're cold.
So they are not contributing to the 15%.
No, and I am pissed off with them. By Christmas, they are going to get 2 thick pullovers, one for each, so that they get the message. I have not started heating yet, and we are not planning to start before at least mid-November.
That is a good example. So we can continue with the questions, please.
Yes. So thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. I have a question for Mr. Molnar. Projections for the, let's say, tightness of storage levels, estimation levels in the EU. You mentioned this respect to reduction low or high energy supply scenario. I was wondering what could affect the energy supply besides the price dynamics with the Asia Pacific, and maybe what was mentioned with the Russian energy imports, which are still ongoing. Do you see any other factors which are major risk factors to that side?
Yes, no, thank you for the question. So indeed, we have 2 scenarios, and then we were developing the sensitivity analysis. One is assuming that average LNG inflow into the EU and the UK, and the other one is assuming a high LNG inflow. And I think that the key risk to that is what we are going to happen with Northeast Asia. If Northeast Asian LNG import requirements will increase this heating season, and it is going to be reflected in the spot price dynamics, then we might end up with lower LNG availability for the European market. I think that there's 2 elements noted about Northeast Asian markets. One is that they have a relatively high seasonality in demand, not that pronounced as in Europe, but still. And they structurally don't have storage because of the geological conditions, with the exception of China, but China has about 13 BCM per year storage capacity. This compares with the 100 BCM we have here in Europe or in the EU. So the seasonal flexibility is met by LNG to a very large extent. The second is that many of those markets are relying on long-term oil index contracts, and the prices for long-term oil index contracts is at the moment around $15–16 per MMBtu. So they are spending less money on their LNG procurements, and in a way, you know, if they really need to be high, they can do that. And I'm not sure. I mean, probably it is still the case for Europe, but it is increasingly difficult because we have been paying extremely high prices for 1 year. So I think that the competition for LNG can ramp up very quickly if there is a need from Northeast Asia. So I think that's the main risk factor. And then there is, of course, you know, you can imagine risk factors from the supply side. You can have a fire, you can have flooding. I mean, just we are talking a lot about the United States. There is currently 2 LNG plants which are off in the US, Freeport, which had a fire, and Cove Point, which had a scheduled maintenance, which was supposed to end on the 18th. We are on the 27th, and the flows haven't returned yet. So that's, you know, but those are the supply side risks, which are more difficult to predict. And hopefully the Norwegian pipelines, they will be safe and secure despite the increased drone activity in the area.
Thank you, Gergely, on the comprehensive answer. We would like to invite other participants in the audience to raise questions. Come on, let's have some hands. Don't be shy. Okay.
I have a question. So first, thank you very much for the presentation. Already. What would be the implication on the carbon trading system? Because, like, if we tell industry to use more coal, that means that the prices are going up, and that's what happened. And are there special policies for saving the industry and let's say decreasing the price of carbon emission allowances, or is business as usual and we just continue the policies that were adopted before?
Well, that's not an easy question. I mean, the carbon prices have increased quite substantially. You know, I mean, I remember in at the beginning of 21, they were at 30 euro per ton, and you know they increased to almost 90 at some point. So I mean, they have been increasing quite substantially. Now, you know, one of the issues with one of the reasons why the carbon prices have been very low during a very long period is because we had the economic crisis in 2009. And basically, we had a surplus of allowances, but it took us like almost a decade to eliminate. So if again, we have a problem with our industry, we may be facing the same problem, but I hope that we have learned the lessons and that we will do something about that. Now, in terms of, you know, all the things that we were planning in terms of carbon prices and carbon basically management, there was also the CBAM system. And well, we are still waiting to see whether this is going to move forward or not. I think this is a big question mark. There is relatively little appetite outside, you know, of Europe for CBAM. I think people are basically hoping that it's not going to happen. I don't think the European Commission agrees on that, but yeah, that's something to basically look and watch how this is going to develop.
Thank you, Anne-Sophie. Gergely, do you have anything to add?
Comments on this excellent question. I mean, that's obviously one of the dilemmas, but I think what is important to see is that the carbon market is also influenced to a great extent by supply demand dynamics and also on the policy guidance from the EU institutions. And as Anne-Sophie mentioned, if there is a decline in industrial activity, this could lead to a reduction in the prices you need to pay for emission allowances. But I mean, I think that when we are looking at, for instance, the electricity prices, which are also extremely high, what has been driving these very high electricity prices? It is 80–90% due to the increase in natural gas prices. And the same, for instance, when we are looking at hydrogen production, you know, fossil fuel-based hydrogen production, it has been also increasing tremendously, and it has been also driven by the increase, mainly about by the increase in gas prices. Yes, the increase in emission prices contributed to it, but it was minor. It was, you know, maybe 20%, and gas was 80%. So I think we have this structural issue with gas, which is really the source of the trouble, and those are more marginal questions.
Professor, do you have any additions on this particular topic on your side?
You know, the problem is that I don't hear the question. So, it's difficult for me to say anything in addition to what has been said by Anne-Sophie and Gergely.
Would you like to repeat the question so that
I mean,
yes.
you know, the problem is the microphone. So, can you repeat the question for me?
Would you like to precise the question so that I can repeat it to the professor?
Yes, basically the question is about the future of the carbon market in regard to price.
The question is, what are your views in regards to the future of the carbon market in Europe regarding this crisis?
I think, you know, obviously there is a moment of difficulty now that the prices of fuels are so high. Some people may ask the question, why should we have also a relatively high price for EU allowances? But, you know, in the end, I think the ETS is there to stay. It is a major policy commitment on the part of the European Union. It will not be changed. And there will be an effort to protect against competition from the rest of the world. The CBAM has been mentioned by Anne-Sophie, and we need to see exactly how it will be implemented. But in my opinion, the underlying structural factor is that Europe is not the right place for energy-intensive industrial processes. So it is going to be very difficult to defend the continuing presence of energy-intensive industrial processes in a context in which most of the energy comes from renewable sources, because renewable sources are scarcer in Europe than they are in other parts of the world. So there is, I mean, you know, it's going back to a situation which existed before the oil era. Before the oil era, energy was not equally available everywhere in the world, and industry tended to cluster around sources of energy. It is only with the oil development, with the development of an oil-based economy, because oil is easily transported and cheaply transported, that industry has been able to essentially prefer to locate close to the market and close to the sources of energy. But now we are going to some extent back to a situation in which industry will have a preference to locate close to the sources of energy.
Precisely. Well, if this can be quite a fine conclusion to our discussion, if there are no additional questions, we can conclude with our discussion and our conference, and definitely say that it has inspired a fruitful discussion that could be coming quite close to the one that has defined this day by the World Energy Outlook. If we are not on par, we are quite close to that level. We would once more like to thank all of the speakers and the participants and the attendants for joining us this evening. It has been quite a fruitful discussion and a quite inspirational event for us, definitely, from the side of the Sciences Po Energy Association. And we hope that in the future we will have more of events of this kind, particularly in cooperation with the Sciences Po Alumni Group for Energy, Infrastructure and Mobility. So thank you all, and for those online, have a good evening wherever you are, and until the next occasion when we hopefully have some similar motif to gather and to discuss. Thank you all.